or Little Kitty in English, was a Chinese influencer and livestreamer with a sizable following. For years, she had uploaded fashion and beauty-themed content to her 670,000 loyal fans on Douyin, TikTok's sister app. Young, attractive, and successful, Little Kitty appeared to be living the type of existence most folks can only dream of. And with every post, she only seemed to become more and more popular, with netizens drawn in by her natural charisma and charm. She was only 25 years old, but she was already a social media expert, said one of Little Kitty's closest friends. She was kind and very funny in everything she did, both online and off. But like most influencers, Little Kitty only let her adoring public see the highlight reel of her life. In the offline world, Little Kitty was Luo Maochi, a young woman who struggled with depression. The bubbly and smiley Little Kitty that everyone knew and loved was little more than a persona that Maochi had created, a mask she wore to conceal her troubled reality. And that cheerful mask would occasionally slip too, with some fans noticing the worrying marks that lined her wrists in certain photos. Even though Kitty had found some happiness through vlogging and streaming, she always seemed to fall back into the blues. That is, until 2019, when she began dating Zhao Ruolin, a basketball enthusiast with a small following on Douyin whom she had fallen head over heels for. Ruolin had a fanbase, sure, but it was many times smaller than Kitty's, though of course that never even crossed her mind. Kitty had finally found someone who could reignite the spark inside of her, and that was more than enough. During their relationship, Kitty mentored Ruolin and encouraged him to post more frequently to his Douyin page. She taught him how to create more engaging content, how to get more impressions, and how to better spread his name online. All the while, she continuously promoted his page, sang his praises, and collaborated with him on videos. Over time, Ruolin's online presence grew, until he reached a follower count of over 2 million people, eclipsing even Little Kitty's following. It was around the time that he reached that milestone, in March 2021, that Ruolin took to his social media pages and dropped some staggering bombshells. He revealed to his entire audience that his now ex-girlfriend, Little Kitty, was an unstable wreck. That throughout their relationship, she had manipulated him, threatening to leap from rooftops whenever she didn't get her way. That she would often fake scars on her wrists using makeup for attention and sympathy. That she had cheated on him several times with rich men that she had met online. And, worst of all, that Little Kitty was pregnant, and he feared the child wasn't his. And rather than handle all of this privately, he decided to announce this to the world, telling all of his fans that he couldn't take it anymore, and that he wanted nothing more to do with Little Kitty. As you can imagine, Kitty's social media pages were flooded with negative comments, lambasting her and saying that she should leap from a rooftop and rid the world of her presence. But as we all know, there's more than one side to every story, and now feeling pressured to tell hers, Kitty took to her socials and made public what she had desperately wanted to keep private. According to Kitty, Ruolin had cheated on her numerous times once he started to gain a following, oftentimes directly messaging his fans and inviting them to hook up. Screenshots of some of those conversations have since become public, released by the very targets he tried to seduce. Kitty also showed off close-ups of her scars, which were obviously real, and provided medical records that prove she was receiving treatment for clinical depression. She stated that she had never been unfaithful to Ruolin, that the child most certainly was his, and that she had even asked him to take a paternity test before the birth. Ruolin had refused to do so. As a result, Kitty terminated the pregnancy. Ultimately, although her feelings for Ruolin had always been 100% authentic, she felt that he had simply used her to grow his online presence. Several of Little Kitty's real-world friends spoke out in her defense. None spoke up for Ruolin. Although we may never know for certain which side of this argument was being more truthful, it's worth noting that Kitty was the only one to provide evidence backing up her version of events. She also dealt with the situation with more grace, keeping her posts respectfully worded and only revealing what was necessary to defend herself from Ruolin's accusations. This whole ordeal had a powerful impact on Kitty's state of mind. It didn't help that Ruolin's fanbase continuously tuned into her livestreams just to leave vulgar comments about her appearance and personality, calling her every name under the sun. A few months passed, and eventually, Kitty moved on, and found herself in a relationship with another man named Lee. Unfortunately, this one was destined to end even more disastrously. Lee would use Kitty's bank account as his own personal piggy bank and even scammed her into buying a house in his name. But that wasn't the worst of it. Though unconfirmed, little Kitty's friends claimed that in October of 2021, she and Lee were spending some time alone together. At some point, Lee slipped something into Kitty's water, waited for her to fall asleep, and invited his friends over. The group then proceeded to rape her. Kitty's friends urged her to report the incident to the authorities, but she refused. Regardless, Lee disappeared of his own accord and cut all communication with Kitty. Shortly thereafter, on October 14th, 2021, little Kitty began a live stream. Some say looking for support from her fans. Some say as an indirect way to grab the attention of either Ruolin or Lee. Whatever her motivation, those tuned in noticed that something was off with Kitty. She appeared completely burnt out and exhausted, and rather than being her upbeat, happy self, she instead addressed her audience in a quiet, sullen voice. This will likely be my last video. In my content, I appear happy, but that's all for show. As many of you know, I've been dealing with a lot of stuff recently, and to be honest, I can't take it anymore. The stream continued on, with Kitty half-heartedly interacting with the chat. That is, until she let out an exasperated sigh and muttered, "He's still not here yet." It was at that point that Kitty brought an object into frame, a clear plastic bottle filled with a dark brown liquid. She told her viewers it was filled with a pesticide, and that she was going to drink it. At this point, thousands of people were tuned into the stream, and whilst many begged for her to reconsider and get some rest, it's always the negative voices that stand out. And this being the internet, hundreds of people were egging her on, telling her to chug down the liquid and get it over with quickly. "Just go ahead and do it," wrote one viewer. "Stop wasting everyone's time." Some of them may have thought they were being funny. Others perhaps thought that little Kitty was joking and that the bottle was full of cola. Ruolin's fans may have meant what they typed. Kitty read some of those negative comments aloud. They were nothing new. She'd received countless hurtful messages in recent months. But that evening, they didn't fuel her sadness. They fueled her resolve. Appearing the happiest she had all stream, little Kitty raised her bottle, almost as if toasting her viewers, and thanked them all for watching before calmly drinking down the liquid in one go. She held up the near-empty bottle, showed off the last few drips inside, and proclaimed, "Wow, that tasted awful." Shortly thereafter, Kitty's calm demeanour melted away. "Haha, you really did it," wrote one viewer. "Good for you," wrote another. Still on stream, Kitty began drinking glass after glass of water before clutching at her throat and gasping heavily. The live stream then abruptly ended. Many assumed that the stream had just been a stunt, but the following day, they found out that little Kitty wasn't bluffing. Media publications announced that she had passed away after ingesting diluted pesticide. After ending the stream the night prior, Kitty had immediately called 120, China's medical emergency number. She explained her situation, and an ambulance quickly arrived at her home in Shandong. But it was too late. Her insides had already been damaged beyond repair, and she passed while receiving treatment at a local hospital. She was then transported to a funeral home in Jining City. Her family arrived, and she was cremated. Which brings us to ghost marriages, or yin marriages as they're known in the Middle Kingdom, a practice which involves both a bride and a groom, neither of them alive. During a yin marriage, the remains of both the soon-to-be husband and wife, whom, more often than not, were strangers in life, are brought together to be married in a formal ceremony, during which their bodies are buried together. This ceremony is performed for several reasons. Firstly, because superstitious families believe that anyone who passes without a partner is doomed to spend the afterlife alone, and that this can bring bad luck to their still living relatives. And secondly, because families with more traditional values consider it shameful to have an unwed daughter. And thirdly, because some families wish to adhere to certain cultural norms, such as how a younger brother shouldn't marry before their elder brother. So if Big Brother should pass unexpectedly before he could wed, a yin marriage could solve that issue. It's important to note that yin marriages have been outlawed in China, and I want to stress that the practice is condemned by the vast majority of the population, and not just because neither of the deceased can agree to the wedding. Unfortunately, it's far from unheard of for a family to sell the body of their daughter to be married to another family's dead son. And given China's population imbalance due to their former one-child policy, it is almost exclusively women being sold, often for large sums of money. This is particularly common in Shandong, where there's a thriving black market for female corpses. It's a bigger business than most people realize too, with the average sale price being somewhere between 50,000 to 70,000 yuan, about $7,000 to $10,000. It's so profitable, in fact, that certain entrepreneurs will go around cemeteries and dig up product to sell. As a result, some wealthy families choose to bury their loved ones in concrete coffins fitted with CCTV cameras. That way, they can make sure that their daughter is still resting in peace. Though rare, there have been documented cases of gangs murdering women specifically to sell them as ghost brides. After all, the fresher the bride, the higher the price tag, and in the minds of the most depraved businessmen, it's smarter to just create their own inventory. There are even names for the 3 tiers of brides that can be purchased from such salespeople. The top tier are called fresh ones. Negotiations for a fresh one can begin mere minutes after the bride has passed, or in some cases, while she's still alive, fighting for her life. Then there are wet bodies, those between a few weeks and a few months old. The lowest quality brides are known as dried meat. Unfortunately, when it comes to yin marriages, even human ashes aren't off limits. And being young, beautiful, and unmarried at the time of her end, little Kitty's could be sold for a hefty sum, especially considering her fresh status. Her parents would never agree to such a sale though. They were modern, well-educated people, not the type of superstitious folk who would subscribe to such a practice. And so, while her loved ones waited outside the crematorium, 3 staff members at her funeral home, surnamed Xiao, Shang, and Lei, secretly filled an urn with powder and stole little Kitty's real ashes. Safe to say, this wasn't their first rodeo. They soon found a buyer for Kitty's remains, but the $11,000 deal fell through when their prospective client backed out at the last minute. Following this, they contacted a second potential customer, who not only backed out, but ended up reporting the trio to the authorities. When apprehended, the wife of one of the men reportedly said to an officer, "What's the problem? It's not a big deal." Thankfully, little Kitty's ashes have since been returned to her family in Hunan. The story of little Kitty has since sparked a wave of debate across the Chinese-speaking internet, with many discussing whether those who egged her on to drink the pesticide should face legal repercussions. Kitty's parents tried to take action against one user in particular who left an inordinate amount of cruel messages. A user with the screen name, "You're the most precious." His basketball profile picture suggests that he was a fan of Ruolin's. However, other than Douyin deleting his account, their case against the user didn't go anywhere. As for the 3 men who tried to sell Kitty's remains, I can't find any information about their sentencing online, at least not in English. I hope they paid for their actions. I hope we can all learn to be a bit more kind to each other in both the offline world and the online. And I hope little Kitty can finally rest in peace. She deserves that much at least. This topic includes images that may disturb some viewers. If you'd like to skip to the next entry, you can do so using the timestamps on the progress bar. Released in 2004 to both critical and commercial success, Half-Life 2 is still considered one of the most influential and groundbreaking games of all time. Developed and published by the legendary Valve Corporation, this second installment in the Half-Life series was originally intended to have a much darker grittier, and overall more somber tone. Traces of that can still be found in the end product, especially in areas like Ravenholm. But perhaps one of the creepiest things you can encounter in the game is this. Corpse01.mdl. If you're familiar with Source Engine games, you'll most certainly have met this fellow at some point. With regards to Half-Life 2, you'll find many of these models strewn unceremoniously throughout the campaign. They're generally used as props for some eerie environmental storytelling. The fallen humans that you pass on your journey, who've met with a variety of terrible fates, positioned in ways that let the player fill in the blanks with their imagination. But far more disturbing than any NPC's hypothetical backstory is the disturbing reality of this model itself. Despite Half-Life 2 having cutting-edge graphics for the time it was released, something about this model's face always seemed to be a bit too realistic. And while browsing through the r/creepygaming subreddit, I came across this SpongeBob meme which hinted that the texture may have an extremely dark origin, one that most people didn't know about. And after doing a little digging, I found out that was true. Corpse01's facial texture had been taken from a real-life photo, a close-up shot of a man's body, one whose face had been completely burnt off. For obvious reasons, I can't show that photo here on YouTube. It's pretty much identical to the in-game model's facial texture, the only difference being that in the real photo, the man still has one of his eyes mostly intact. For the in-game texture, an artist simply duplicated the man's empty eye socket. Perhaps they thought keeping an actual lifeless eye in the game was a step too far. From what I can find online, the photo was taken from a medical textbook used to teach students about burns. The images used in such textbooks are sourced from all over the place. This has led many people to speculate about who this man was in life and how he came to meet such a terrible fate. Strangely, despite the man's face being completely burned off, his neck, chest, and even hair remain undamaged. It's hard to think up an explanation for how this man, whoever he was, could have sustained such a wound accidentally. It almost feels like the burning has to have been done to him intentionally, and I've seen many people repeating the same explanation online. That he was the victim of a mafia killing, and that they used a blowtorch to melt his face off and make an example of him. That would explain why his hair is intact. But even though that story keeps getting repeated as if it were fact, there's absolutely no evidence that this man met with foul play, other than the strange condition of his body. Personally, I think there's a more innocent explanation, if innocent is the right word to use. Many people donate their remains to science, and many of those are used to teach med students. I think it's far more likely that a medical practitioner took one of those cadavers and torched the facial area specifically as a teaching example. At least, I hope that's the case. Since the photo's online fingerprint can only be traced back to 2011, that means that some employee at Valve must have scanned a copy of a textbook and imported the texture into the game, possibly without asking permission from the book's publisher, and definitely without asking permission from the deceased or his relatives. Half-Life 2 had a notoriously rushed development cycle, so this may have been done as a time-saving measure. But even if all the right boxes had been ticked, and the image was a royalty-free stock photo, Valve still didn't tell any of their player base about the texture's origin, leaving them to interact with a real body in Half-Life 2, roleplay as him in Gary's mod, and use him in fan projects, most of them ignorant about the texture's less than wholesome backstory. That being said, I suppose it's possible that nobody at Valve even realized the disturbing origin of the texture themselves. That's to say, it may have come in a third-party asset library without its origin being explicitly noted. Off the top of my head, I can't think of many games that feature real photos of dead people. Hong Kong 97, Batman the Enemy Within, but many others have used morbid references for their models. For instance, several of Bioshock's splicer enemies were based on World War I soldiers who underwent pioneering facial surgeries. Mortal Kombat 11 developers looked at obliterated bodies to design their infamous fatalities, leaving one staff member needing therapy. And as for Valve themselves, their development team on Left 4 Dead 2 would create a nightmare folder full of stomach-churning real images, but found this type of research to be so gratuitous and unnecessary that they didn't make use of any of them in-game, instead basing their zombie designs on things like housing insulation and potato skins. So it seems Valve did learn their lesson in the end, and you can be sure that if Half-Life 3 ever does get announced, this texture will almost certainly not be making a reappearance. Unfortunately, this isn't the only texture in Half-Life 2 based on a real person with a sad backstory. Though not directly ripped from real-life photos, many of the human characters in-game are modelled on actual people, mostly actors, Valve employees and their families, all of whom are credited in-game. All of them, that is, except for the facial reference for Eli Vance. While searching for inspiration for the character's face, Valve's graphic designer, Randy Linden, passed a homeless man holding a sign saying he was looking for work. Since the man had a, quote, interesting appearance, Randy asked him to come back to the studio and have his face scanned into the game in return for a few bucks. The developers never even took note of the man's name, and he was never credited in any of the games he appeared in. Despite being immortalized in one of the most legendary games of all time, we still don't know who this man is. It makes you wonder whether he's even aware of how well known his face has become. Whoever he is, I hope he's still out there somewhere, and doing okay. r/confessions, a subreddit where people use throwaway accounts to share their deepest and darkest secrets. Though more often than not, the posts either revolve around personal dramas or cheating spouses. But every so often, you'll stumble upon a truly dark revelation. Like this post, made by an anonymous user 10 months ago. I know the person who possibly committed an unsolved double murder. So I'll start by saying this. I'm not entirely sure that this is true, so take it with a grain of salt. My neighbour of 2 years is a retired Delta Force officer. He's been through some shit in terms of war and its ramifications as far as PTS and paranoia goes. He can barely walk, and I work at a grocery store down the street. I do little jobs for him, bring him things from the store, and stuff like that. One day, after I come back from the store, he starts talking to me about where he's from. Basically, he was adopted by these 2 rich folks and moved into their house with another foster child whom he still calls his stepbrother. This town he lived in and grew up in was your basic industry town and didn't have much to offer. Therefore, like most small town people, he resorted to drinking and doing drugs. Well, he tells me that when he was a freshman or sophomore in high school, he was dating this one girl that he really liked. I'm not going to give her name for reasons that'll soon become obvious, but she went to his school and was quite pretty and popular. In his words, she was the only girl I ever wanted to be with in high school, and I finally got my chance. One day, after they'd had an evening of fun, she left to go back home. But this was a lie that she told him, so she could meet up with another guy at the park. Me and my friends happened to go to that park too, he told me, and we see her with this popular guy that I hated. I went up to the car, shot her in the head with my .22, and shot him in the chest so he wouldn't die quickly, so he could sit there and bleed out while I mocked him. I defensively sat there and went along with all of this BS. But then, he brought out the evidence. Items which he had grabbed from the car that night before he and his friends took off. Now, mind you, I thought this was absolute bull. He's a very straightforward guy, and I believe he's an honest guy too. I guess because he really has nothing to lose, considering he's dying of 3 types of cancer. But he's never talked like that to me so intimately, especially about something so real and crazy. Fast forward 2 weeks. I was watching one of those unsolved crime documentaries on YouTube, curious if anything he said rang true. I have to say though, everything lined up to a T. It only got worse when this popular documentary, viewed by hundreds of thousands of people, told me the exact evidence taken from the car. All the same items I had recently been shown by my neighbour. I don't know what to do with this information. Every documentary I've watched on the incident shows me the evidence my neighbour took from the car. The things he's kept in his house all these years. This happened many decades ago, and I truly don't know what to think of it. Why did he tell me all this? Why would he make it up? Why would he have all of those missing pieces of evidence that dozens of documentaries say are missing? My only thought at this point is for some reason he's obsessed with this case and constructed all of the evidence to make it look real. But honestly, I believe he did it. I think he genuinely told me the truth, because at this point, he has nothing to lose. How do I deal with this? Going to the police won't do anything, and he's always been good to me, paid me a lot of money, and helped me out of bad situations. I'm not going to believe I'm a bad person for holding on to this knowledge, but I genuinely want some feedback on what or how to feel in this kind of situation, when I very well may be the only person holding on to the information that 2 innocent families have been searching for years. Please don't judge. I just feel weird about hearing this from him. It all lines up so well, but he's always been great to me, and like I said, maybe it's not true, but there are just too many coincidences. Unsurprisingly, the comment section was inundated with questions about the case. What were the names of the victims? Where exactly had the incident taken place? And what was the evidence that the old man was keeping? Since the original poster, OP, was remaining tight-lipped, the good people of Reddit began conducting their own investigation to figure out the full story, and, if true, to bring this old man to justice. If the OP wasn't going to act on the confession, they were. After all, this certainly wouldn't have been the first time that someone had made a dark confession on Reddit that turned out to be true. Perhaps thinking that he shouldn't have opened up this can of worms, OP went on to delete the entire thread, likely in an effort to sweep his neighbor's past under the rug and stop this search effort. An effort which he certainly hadn't anticipated. Still, that didn't stop the most determined web sleuths from carrying on with their detective work. And soon, it became apparent which unsolved case OP's neighbor had been involved in. User PReal420 made a separate post on RBI. Today I stumbled upon a post on r/confessions. The OP had a throwaway, and the post was just deleted less than 15 minutes ago. OP asked if he should turn in his neighbor, who had confessed to a double murder. Upon researching the little bits of information he gave, I discovered he was talking about the Westside Park murders that happened in Muncie, Indiana in 1985. I guess I'm asking if that post can be retrieved and traced back to its source. This seems very legit, but could be an elaborate troll. Either way, I believe it's something that should at least be looked into. The Westside Park slayings. In September of 1985, Kimberly Dowell and Ethan Dixon were both slain in Muncie, Indiana, in the exact same fashion described by OP in his post. They were both found lifeless inside Ethan's Volkswagen Rabbit hatchback, with the engine still running. Several items had reportedly been taken from the scene. Witnesses reported seeing 3 individuals leaving the park at around the time of the incident, and this sketch of a possible suspect was released to the public. Despite a thorough investigation though, the case unfortunately went cold. Other Reddit users began to comment under PReal's post, stating that they had contacted law enforcement in Muncie and brought the confession to their attention. PReal himself even contacted the FBI. Unfortunately, they still haven't heard back from them. As such, the authenticity of OOP's post remains uncertain. Given the vagueness of the original post, it is completely possible that this was all just a tasteless hoax. But it's also completely possible that said vagueness was strategic, and that this was a genuine confession. After all, the real perp has to have been someone's neighbor.